Today, bank attacks Bitcoin, Greece attacks the eurozone, and oil attacks pretty much everything. Your host is Rick Falfinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 24, 2015. The financial world continues in freefall, and most people haven't seen it yet. This is important because governments will always save themselves first before caring for the finances of their citizens. But first, some good news and a light on the horizon. The Swedish third largest bank, SEB, took out a full-page ad in Sweden's largest daily this week to discredit Bitcoin and explain its stance on why Bitcoin must be regulated. When the old central bank institutions start spending full-page color ad money on discrediting Bitcoin, that's when you know that the fear has a real price tag attached to it. And yes, obviously, they want Bitcoin to be regulated or it can't succeed. That's their story. Just like open source and free software cannot succeed without copyright monopoly protection. Oh wait, it did. It already supplies over 90% of the world's computers and almost all the world's servers. Apparently, the old guard couldn't see the open model. It's kind of like, well, you get it, how any open model cannot possibly succeed in the views of the old regulated closed guard. And while the headline of this ad had, "This might be the end of Bitcoin," it's rather the case that Bitcoin might be the end of that person's job who did that analysis at the commercial bank. Speaking of banks and finance on the international arena, there is still no solution in sight with a Greek standoff between the IMF and the rest of the eurozone versus a looming Greek default. And it seems more and more likely that Greece is actually going to default and re-currency, essentially going back to the drachma, the so-called Grexit scenario, and quite heavily devalue its currency in order to get some sort of economy back on its feet again. That's how you normally do it, actually. That Greece should not have been part of the eurozone to begin with. Actually, the eurozone should not have been part of the eurozone to begin with, but that's a different story. The eurozone is so disparate, so divergent in its economies, that maintaining such a currency area was practically impossible if you didn't also have fiscal policy at the same level. But you don't, because the European Union is comprised of sovereign member states, so you don't have federal fiscal policy. You just have just have federal monetary policy, and those cannot stand on their own, or you'll get scenarios such as this. So the next question then is, what happens in the case of a Grexit? Greece exit from the eurozone. What happens if Greece, more importantly, defaults on its loans? Most people who are exposed to Greek debt have tried to cut losses by now, but it's still quite uncertain if Italy survives a Greek default. And if Italy does not survive a Greek default, then neither does Spain and neither does Portugal, who would fall after Italy. And if Spain and Portugal fall, then France is next, and so the dominoes will begin to fall. So the question is now, is Brussels able to contain this collapse to Greece? That is doubtful. That is very doubtful. We will know soon enough, and we'll know as it plays out. There's no way to foretell this. The things really are brewing up to a perfect storm here. Because there's also the oil price. It fell like a rock, and then abruptly stopped about 4 months ago, slowly starting a steady recovery after having fallen from about $110 per barrel. It fell to 45 45 and 50, depending on what index you're looking at. And remember now, this is the world's most important commodity. And when the price of that commodity slashes in half, that has serious geopolitical consequences for the balance of power. The price has recovered somewhat since the price was in free fall, and it's now up to 60-ish from having been at 45-ish after falling from 120-ish, 110-ish, 120-ish. However, oil producer statistics and oil market statistics give us a very clear view that the oversupply that led to the free fall of prices is not over. In fact, the oversupply increased last quarter. The oversupply of oil increased last quarter. The market isn't always rational. The market doesn't always go just by supply and demand. But in the end, the market price tends to always find its equilibrium with supply and demand, even if there are temporary hiccups on the way there. And it wouldn't indeed appear as though this recovery of the oil price from 45 to 60 is just such a hiccup, an irrationality. Based on supply and demand, oil prices will continue to fall. And if oil prices continue to fall at the same time as countries default, then we might be heading into a financial perfect storm. This matters for liberty because governments always save themselves first. Always. Your liberty will be your own responsibility in this scenario. I'm Rick Falkfinger and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.